Καλώς ήρθατε σε άλλη μια συνέντευξη τύπου το 52ο Φεστιβάλ Κινηματογράφου Θεσσαλονίκης. Σήμερα έχουμε μαζί μας την Αμερικανίδα σκηνοθέτη Sara, μια τρομερή μορφή του Αμερικάνικου ανεξάρτητου κινηματογράφου, της οποίας τη συνολική δουλειά δείχνουμε φέτος στο φεστιβάλ. Θα ήθελα να δώσω το λόγο στο Διευθυντή κύριο Ιππίδη και μετά θα ξεκινήσουμε με κάποιες ερωτήσεις και φυσικά και εσείς μπορείτε να ρωτάτε όποτε θέλετε. Ευχαριστώ.
Καλημέρα και από μένα. Η σημερινή παρουσία της Sara είναι ένα συναισθηματικά πολύ έντονο γεγονός για μένα. Είμαστε φίλοι για πάρα πολύ καιρό. Είχα την ευτυχία να δείξω την πρώιμη δουλειά της στο φεστιβάλ που διοργάνωμε στο Μοντρεάλ και παραμένουμε πολύ στενά συνδεδεμένοι και με τη Sara και τον Jim Jarmusch και χαίρομαι πάρα πολύ που είναι μαζί μας. Μας δίνει ευκαιρία να δείξω το έργο της μέχρι σήμερα στη Θεσσαλονίκη, στην Ελλάδα για πρώτη φορά. Και επίσης θέλω να πω και δημόσια ότι προσδοκώ το επόμενο έργο της που ετοιμάζει και ελπίζω να έχουμε και το μεθεπόμενο και το άλλο και το άλλο και να είναι πάντα μαζί μας, γιατί αυτή είναι μια φιλία που δεν πρέπει να τελειώσει ποτέ. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a few questions. It's been said a few times by a director whose tributes we organize that it's a particular point in a director's life when the whole of their work is shown and they're sort of forced to, you know, look back to it and figure out what it all means. So I think it would be very interesting for the people here if you talked a bit how you got your start in filmmaking, because it was a very particular and special era for American cinema. And how, you know, looking back now at all your films, how do you feel that you got from point A to the point you are at now?
Well, I started making films. I actually lived in Greece from 1974 to 1975. I was studying classic literature, and while I was living in Greece, I got involved with an experimental theater company. And I started being torn between theater and my classical studies, because I originally wanted to be an archaeologist. But theater took over, and I saw my first Cassavetes film in Athens, which was A Woman Under the Influence, and started to see all of his work. I had written a theater play that people kept saying was cinematic, and I applied to NYU Film School, which was in the East Village, and in the heart of the punk scene in the late 70s. And although Jim and myself and Spike Lee and Tom DiCillo and were all in school together, we were also very much involved with the community in the East Village of musicians and artists. I recently saw a show that a friend put together of all the art and dance and paintings and films that were done at that time, and we all really germinated each other. We all worked in films, we all worked in different mediums, and we all worked on each other's films. And it was also a time in New York where it was pretty lawless. So you didn't need permits, you didn't need money, you just went out, you took a camera and you shot. And then if the police stopped you, you know, they were really much more involved with violent crime, because New York was very violent then, and really didn't care about shooting. You know, the fact that we shot without permits, and we also didn't have problems like now you have to have permission to get use certain signage and things like that. We were very free. And it was a very inspiring period in terms of just having ideas and then executing them and putting them on film. For example, when I made You Are Not I, which was based on a Paul Bowles story, William Burroughs lived around the corner from me, and he was a friend of Paul Bowles's. And my friend Howard Brookner was making a documentary on Burroughs, and through Burroughs I got Paul Bowles's address, and I made the film without the rights. And then I wrote to Paul and I said, I made this film. And he said, well, show it to my agent at William Morris and we'll see what we can do. And I showed it to the agent at William Morris, really nervous. And I was only 24 years old. And he gave me all the rights outright. And then Paul Bowles and I started our writing correspondence. And it was an amazing time because you had all these great people like Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg with all the young people. We were all mixed in together. Robert Frank, who's still a dear friend of mine, and his wife June Leaf. So it was a very particular time in New York. And one of my favorite slogans of all time, graffitis of all time, is USA out of NYC. And I always felt like New York was its own separate country from the United States.
Would you say that you feel nostalgic for these times now?
No, I have no nostalgia whatsoever. I actually wanted Dimitri to call this little collection of my films called Flashback.
Since you mentioned You're Not I, your first film by the Paul Bowles story, it's a film that's it's been much lauded, especially I think because the atmosphere and the mood of the story has transferred so well from the actual story to the screen. But could you, I think the lovely story about the lost print, I think is really interesting and people should hear about it. Do you want to say a bit?
Well, the film was, we found out that where we had been storing the film had a big flood. And my internegative, my negative, everything was lost. And we discovered that around 1997. And then, and I had one festival print, a very battered festival print, and we made a 1-inch video master of that print. It was almost an unprojectable print because it had been projected so much. And then about 3 years or 4 years ago, I looked at the video transfer, and the signal had disappeared, which is what happens with video. The signal can eventually disappear, and I thought, okay, nobody's ever going to see this film again, and we were really devastated that it was gone. The summer of May of 2010, I got a phone call from this archivist who was working with Paul Bowles' work and was putting it in at the special collections at the University of Delaware. And he said, we found a pristine print of your film among Paul Bowles' things in Tangier. And they didn't expect to really, they thought the film would be in very bad shape because it had been for 30 years in the weather in Tangier, just covered with bug powder. And when they put it up and looked at it, they realized the print had only been projected very rarely, and that it was in very good condition, which is very odd that it maintained. Usually you have shrinkage and all kinds of problems, and black and white is a very delicate film stock. And I had forgotten that I had sent the print to Paul Bowles in 1982 to thank him for giving me the rights. And at that time there was no VHS, there was no other medium I could send to him. And I had met a guy named Guy Zimmerman who was going to see Paul Bowles. His girlfriend's parents had been friends of Jane and Paul Bowles, and they were going to visit him, and I gave him a print to hand carry to Paul Bowles. And Paul Bowles screened it in Tangier and then wrote me a critique of what he thought of the film. And I mean, the whole thing was miraculous that they found this print. And then I received restoration money from Women in Film, and as well as the University of Delaware put money into the restoration. And we've now gotten the film back onto film again. And we did a HD cam, which is what is being shown here now. It's a very miraculous story, actually.
I think there's a bit of magic in it, like in all your films. Seeped. So your next film, Sleepwalk, you again, Suzanne Fletcher is the protagonist, like in You're Not I, yet in a quite different role. She has a quite different demeanor in Sleepwalk. Sleepwalk also has this affinity for things that happen in the mind, strange, weird mysteries and fairy tales. Yet it's in its approach and its narrative, it's a much more mainstream film than You're Not I. So I was wondering what the inspiration for that was, and you know, how it relates with what you wanted to do after You're Not I.
It's mainstream?
In terms of story structure, at least. It has, you know, a more, well, it has dialogue, at least.